Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salescadence Podcast. As always, absolute pleasure to spend the next 45 minutes in your company. And I think that this one's going to be a bit of a humdinger. I'm joined today on the podcast by a wonderful guy by the name of Nic Rixon. Let me give you a very brief introduction behind Nic. And then the other next thing I'm going to ask you to do is go and get a piece of paper and a pen, because I've got a sort of sneaky feeling there's going to be some content that you're going to get over the next 45 minutes that I think is going to be incredibly useful to you if, like most of you are, you're in a sales role or you have some kind of link to the entrepreneurial world. All will be revealed. So Nic Rixon, what a wonderful guy. Successful entrepreneur, built and sold companies in manufacturing, property, training and commercial design. He's one of the founder partners of Sherlaws and his current business, which is Strategic Growth for Enterprise. Nic's consulted for hundreds of mid-tier businesses. Some of the names will be incredibly familiar to you, like British Aerospace, Sony Pictures, HSBC, and the Direct Selling Association. And I would include in that myself as well too, because I'm currently going through some coaching with Nic, and some of that will be revealed. Some of the content will be revealed as we speak. Nic speaks all over the place. He's been asked to speak at numerous events across the UK and Europe. And of course, his specialist subject is business and entrepreneurship. Now, I've been sort of stalking Nic for probably about 2 or 3 years when I first discovered the world of sort of Daniel Priestley. And Nic works and has worked very closely with that organization too. But if you know anything about the UK scene of the entrepreneurs, then you'll be very familiar with Nic's work. And if you're not, well, you're about to find out. Nic, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I look forward to living up to that reputation.
Great. So folks, grab a pen and buckle down and belt in, whatever the expression is, because that's quite a resume, Nic. And what I'd really like to do at the top of the show is if someone stopped you in the street and said to you, what do? What do you say?
Fascinating one. That I tend to, when I'm working with people on exactly that, I first of all have to assess whether I quite like a relationship with the person that asks me what I do. If I don't like the look of them, I tell them I'm a vacuum cleaner salesman or an insurance salesman. Do you have insurance? And that normally gets rid of them pretty quickly. It's a good way to get rid of that irritating pest around the pool on holiday. If I like the look of them and they look like a stand-up guy or stand-up girl, I'll say I'm a business coach, which normally gets them to go either, oh, that's interesting, or oh, no, really? And one of two things will happen. That's fascinating. What's that entail? In the UK, we've got to stop confusing politeness with interest. So I tend to allow people to ask another question. But typically I say, look, I'm a business coach. If they ask me what that means, what that entails, I said, look, I help businesses grow from good to great. Most of my clients want more time, less stress, or more money. And that's what we do to help them.
One of the very first questions that I always ask any guest that comes on the show, Nic, is, and I stole this from Glenn Carlson, who's one of Daniel Priestley's close friends. You know Glenn, I'm sure.
Yep.
He does it in Australian accent. I don't, obviously. But what were you doing? Take yourself right back to the very beginning. I'm talking probably just outside of education, or maybe still in education. What were you doing when you made your very first sale?
Well, that's fascinating. I can tell you, I was 9, and I probably picked up my philosophy in work from the person I was working with when I was 9. And this guy was a guy called Stuart Plank. He was out, and the Planks Dairy is a very famous dairy down in the West Country. Anybody that hears my accent works out where it's from. I'm from Devizes, so I speak a bit of correct bristle. And Stuart was what I call the whistling, running, laughing milkman. Everywhere he went, he was running, he was whistling, he was laughing, he was always happy. And what used to happen was there's the short run of houses from the 2 roads that led off the main road, which was our block, was about 14 houses. I used to help Stuart, started when I was 9, and I'd run that with him. And my first sale was when I knocked on the door and asked Mrs. Smith if she would like an extra pint of milk this morning. Because Stuart said to me, we've got too much on board. See if you can, I'm 9, right? See if you can sell this to, and Mrs. Smith bought the extra pint, and I went away and got my first experience of sales. Stuart was over the moon. I got a free bottle of orange juice at the end of our street and went home as proud as punch with my pay. So my first
that's very much the McDonald's do you want to go large story then, really, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And did it really mean something to you at the time?
No, it didn't. I just loved the fact that I did something, it worked, and somebody who I did it for was happy. I mean, if there's the recipe for keeping your staff happy, then I don't know what else there is. I think when I really got into sales big time was quite interesting. I used to help my part-time jobs. I had 3 part-time jobs by the time I was 14. And then my father said to me, right, you've worked out where money comes from. Don't ever come back to me again, which I never have. And I worked for...
Great advice, by the way.
Well, I told my son the same thing at 14, and he never has either. But I worked for a business called Kevin's Menswear. Kevin did kind of everything from overalls and jeans. I bought my first pair of 501 shrink-to-fit jeans from Kevin. For those of you who don't know what they are, they were really cool jeans that you had to actually get in the bath with and get them to shrink. I literally wore those things to pieces. But my job was to help him carry his boxes of stuff back to his van. This was a mobile market. He'd show up in his lorry. We'd unload 3 huge, great big trays or trestle tables and hang them up, etc. And what very quickly happened was I was just supposed to unload them and load them. So I'd unload them all, and the first customer would come up, and Kevin would get busy, and then the second customer would come up, and after about 2 weeks, I'm there selling jeans. So I'm 14 years of age, and I'm flogging jeans and flogging hats and flogging boiler suits, etc. Pretty soon, Kevin watches me, and of course, 14's cute. Not that I was that cute, but 14's cute. And you go, my son was selling stuff when he was 11 and 12. And of course, they bought more stuff off of him than they would off of me on the stand because 14's cute. So I was selling more gear than Kevin was. So eventually, Kevin would rock up stay on the stand till 10 o'clock. Then he'd go and have breakfast till about 1 and leave me on the stand on my own. 14 years of age, flogging stuff faster than I could move. And he said, you sell more stuff in the 3 hours I'm having breakfast than I used to sell on my own. So everything I did was about selling. I worked at a butcheries behind the counter, serving people. What did you want? Do you fancy a nice piece of kidney, Mrs. Smith? Lovely to see you this morning. Like, this is all before I'd left school.
Yeah, and so you just mentioned Zig Ziglar. What on earth were you doing hanging around with that icon of the psychology world?
It was really funny. I never really had any traditional sales training, but I'm what's called an enthusiast. So I'm a professional enthusiast. If I don't like something, I don't love something, then I can't talk about it enthusiastically. For me, as I said to you earlier today, enthusiasm, last 4 letters are IASM. I am sold myself. Now, if I'm not sold on the product, I can't sell it to somebody else. So I started my first business when I was 21, 22. It was a packaging business. I'm an ex-designer. I started my career as a designer and an engineer. And I found packaging fascinating because, like most men, I think we have a short attention span. So building something that took 6 months, building an airplane that I was going to sell, would drive me nuts. The lovely thing about packaging, I could meet somebody on Monday, work out what their problem was, design something on Tuesday, get the order on Wednesday, order the material on Thursday, manufacture it and deliver it on Friday. So it was, here's the problem, here's the solution. You know how fix-it, solution-led guys are generally. I'm not saying that women never are, but it's much more a male thing. Give me a problem, I'll fix it. So I love the packaging industry, so I was an enthusiast. But I got bored selling business to business because you're a buyer in a business. It's not your £1 million you're going to spend with me over a year. As long as I give you the littlest amount of hassle in your job as I possibly can, you'll spend your boss's money on me. And most of my clients were buyers inside businesses that could afford our stuff. Occasionally I worked with an owner. And I started to get to that point where I thought, I need to enhance my sales. I need to go and do something else. So one of the businesses I started was a direct sales business. And I went looking for this after somebody handed me a Zig Ziglar tape at one of these network marketing meetings where, and I found that just a little bit too American, rah-rah when I first went there, being frightfully British. But they handed me this tape and it was a bootleg tape of Zig Ziglar. And I listened to this thing all the way home and I always remember it to this day. And he talked about, how people answer the telephone. And he said, I can't believe some people answer the telephone. Hello? And he said, you phone our company in Dallas, Texas. The number's 214-233-9191. I remember it to this day. And we'll give you a lesson on how to answer the telephone. And my lady will say, good morning. This is Zig Ziglar. How may I direct your call? And I'm going, who's this guy? I like this guy. So I get back to my house and I phone his number in Dallas, Texas, 214-233-9191. And sure enough, this girl says, good morning. This is Zig Ziglar. This is Stephanie. How may I direct your call? I'm going, I need some of that.
Right.
He did. And if you listen to his story, he said, look, I got into sales. I thought it was a good idea. He said, I sold lots of stuff. He said, I sold my car, sold my house, sold my furniture. He said, I was in 17 get-rich-quick schemes until he was 45. And then somebody took him under their wing at the Salad Master Corporation and taught him how to sell. And from that moment on, he went on to become the number one salesperson and 3,000 salespeople. His brother was number two, just fascinating. And so all of his stories are about training people and building the sales career in the Salad Master Corporation. He had no success until he was 45. All of his success came after 45. And when I first met him, I was 38. So I'm kind of going, wow, you know. And he told these amazing stories about getting down into the weeds with some family and some husband sitting there and they're doing the pitch, etc. And I thought, I got to get into somebody's house and sell something. You know, I've got to look somebody in the eye and get them convinced that what I've got is worth more than the £2,500 they've got in their wallet.
If you were advising me, you know a bit about me. If you were advising me, I haven't done any NLP work myself, but is that you know what I do for a living, and is there any value in me?
There's some useful communication stuff in there that will teach you a lot about language patterns and listening beyond the words. You know, the English language is an incredibly, incredibly complex tool, and you know, when you start to understand some of the things that people say behind what they say, and you know, the really obvious ones, you know, like, I'm not telling you this is the problem, it's a problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's those obvious ones where you, and that kind of third person language patterns that people use, you know, everybody hates me. And, you know, some of the ways to deal with those simple coaching tools can be really useful with kids, should never be used on spouses, highly dangerous to coach your spouse. I've found to my cost.
So sort of brings up to today then, Nic. Just explain to the listener and give them a little bit of context about the sorts of people that you work with, some of the challenges that they face.
Sure. Look, a lot of the coaching and stuff I did because I was getting such great results in the businesses I ran by applying it myself. So I'm kind of not one of those if you can't teach type of situations, because I don't believe that's true. I think there are some amazing teachers who should be teaching. They would never want to go and build a business, but are brilliant teachers. But I was just grabbing information that I learned and applying it. And very quickly, people started to say, can you show me how to do that? The simple question is, how do you get your salesman to do that? Or how do you get your receptionists to do that? And I, just as a joke one day, I said, well, look, send me your receptionist over for a couple of weeks and I'll train her or him. And then I did that 2 or 3 times. And finally, one day, somebody said, how much is that going to cost? And I went, oh, that's interesting. So I said, 50% of whatever you're paying her. I had to make a number up.
Yeah.
That sounded cheap. And they went, oh, I said, so, you know, if you're paying her £2,000, you're going to pay her £2,000 and you're going to pay me $1,000. So you've got to think this through now. So I've now got a receptionist in my reception that somebody's paying me £1,000 to do a job that I would have paid somebody £2,000 to do. So for 3 years, I had a cash net positive wage bill. 60% of my staff were other people's staff being paid to come and work in my factory to learn how to do what we did. And they were paying me to train them.
Did someone teach you that, or did you just learn that yourself?
Pure accident. It just happened accidentally. Somebody asked me, what do you charge for that? And I'm quick enough to think on my feet and went, 50% of what you pay them.
So Gladys is answering the phone in your packaging business.
Absolutely. I had 3 receptionists at one point. All being, 3 receptionists answering the phone, all being trained. When they weren't answering the phone, they were studying a workbook. All 3 paying me to be there. So that's where that started. And then some people know this, Jonathan Jay started a business called the Coaching Academy, asked me to come and design a coaching course. I designed the coaching course, the original material for that. It's changed quite a lot since. Bev James runs it now and it's brilliant. Still using some of the basic stuff that I did back in the early day. One of those coaches went out to Australia and met a fund manager who mathematically modeled businesses, and with their modeling and some of the entrepreneur stuff I did, we launched Sherlaw's Business Coaching, which was just a spectacular success. It just worked. It just shifted businesses quickly. It was easy to get into in the mind of a CEO who could probably only give me an hour a month, if that. And if I couldn't in that hour show him how to find 2 hours next month and be more profitable, he wouldn't come back. So it was phenomenally impactful in businesses. We probably got up to I think we did about 6,000, 7,000 businesses globally before the W recession hit. I kind of semi-retired and went out to live in Madrid, but still delivering coaching. I ran a client base of 6 or 7 clients at any one time. And then came back in 2015, and we kind of took a slightly different path. Sherlaw's wanted to do much more grow, and I wanted to get into the exit side. So I want to get into much more the transactional space. So strategic growth for enterprise actually also stands for GFE, Growth Fund Exit. And I wanted to focus more on that. How do I help businesses build assets so that they're more valuable and can sell. Because one of the things I started to discover was most businesses don't sell. And if they do, they don't sell for anything near what they're worth. And if you think that that's probably 90% of the business community isn't going to be able to sell their business or isn't going to be able to sell it for what it's worth. So I kind of went, most people come asking for growth, but what they really want is, can you help me turn this into an asset I can sell? So hence the SGFE, Strategic Growth for Enterprise. The GFE really stands for Growth Fund Exit. And we work with anybody in it that's got a business that's formed. We don't tend to do startups. So businesses that have gone through what I call the iteration period, where they've kind of worked out what it is they do and who they do it for and how much they charge. They're usually hitting 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 revenue at the bottom end of our scale, anywhere up to 30 million. So it's that entrepreneurial journey. If I said my absolute sweet spot is that about 3 million to about 9 million, where I know the size of the business, I'll typically be able to meet most of the managers. I'll get to know the CEO quite well. It's usually an owner. It's not been passed on to somebody else at that point. They usually haven't got a VC in there or a lender. It's usually entrepreneurial founder businesses, and I can usually smash them out the park. Like we double those in size in no time at all. So most people start a business with a product idea. They know how to sell a car, design a kitchen, build a house. And what happens is doing that creates a business opportunity, which you need to add things to. All of the service industry people we work with, architects, accountants, lawyers, vets, doctors, they have 7 years practice on how to be an architect or a doctor. If they're lucky, they get half a day on how to build a practice. So most of them haven't got a bloody clue, once you get past 7 people, how to run it.
Yeah.
And not only don't know how, don't want to. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to draw things. I'm working with one of the best architects in the world at the moment, who is frustrated as hell because the 72 staff in his business means he doesn't get to do drawings anymore. And he's a genius. And all he wants to do is get back to architecture, as do vets, as do doctors, as do lawyers, as do accountants. So what we learned how to do fundamentally was take that structure that has to sit inside corporates for them to be investable and publicly listed, and design what would the entrepreneurial version, not take the corporate model and smash it into small businesses like so many people do, like when PwC coming down and try and get you to do that. What does the entrepreneurial version of that look like? And that's what we built. And it is just so easy. I mean, 18 months into a client, most of them could come and do what we do in other clients. Transferring the intellectual property and the skill set over is 18 months. You couldn't do that in an MBA.
Let me bring the conversation to a bit of a focal point for the listener in terms of actually getting their pen and paper out, because one of the things that you've been really helping me on over the last few weeks, Nick, is even though I deliver sales training, the sales trainer needs to be trained. You've always got to be refining your skills. And one of the great things I've sort of learned over the last month working with you is, those pieces that have been missing in the jigsaw puzzle. One of the really interesting things that and it probably goes off of the back of what you've just been talking about there, is the importance of positioning. Okay. Yep. Would explain to the listeners what positioning is, but would positioning be one of the perhaps problems that you see actually isn't quite there yet in organizations that you go and help?
Look, not only is it not quite there yet, it is so woefully misunderstood by people in their own business and by even the people that are doing the marketing in the business. And I can give you some good examples of how not understanding or not being able to communicate that position well can cause a problem. So I did a session. I trained a whole bunch of the IBM sales eminence team. These are the people responsible for $500 million or more in sales. So the top 80 people in IBM who've been through their own sales school. And when I said to them, so what kind of issues are you finding when you get out in the marketplace? And they said, well, very often we're walking in and people are still looking at us and saying, oh, you sell what they call tin. Like, you still sell tin. And they don't really. And they hadn't done for a long time. I mean, they were a consultancy. When people just hear IBM, oh, you sell computers, you sell boxes. I said, how long ago did you stop selling boxes? 22 years ago. I went, what? And people who were buying from you weren't even alive when you stopped selling it, still think you sell tin. I said, that's how bad your PwC image, big blue, how bad that is.
So what is positioning? Because a lot of people think, well, what is positioning?
Perfect. So if you think the exercise of positioning is the ability to consciously manage the image of your company in your client's mind. Now, let me give you an example. If I say Rolex, people know exactly what I'm talking about. If I said Ford or Porsche, whether you've bought either, you can get an idea of what the experience, the showroom, even the coffee cup in the Porsche showroom versus the coffee cup in the Ford showroom. Ford showroom, sorry if there are any Ford drivers or listeners or owners in the room. Ford showroom, you're going to go and get a cardboard cup out of a drinks machine. Porsche showroom, you're going to get a
bit of Royal Dalton, perhaps.
Yeah, you're going to get one of the little coffee cups. Now, go into a Rolls Royce showroom, you're going to get a fresh brew cup of tea and a beautiful bone china tea set. Like, there's a picture in your mind of what that looks like. EasyJet versus BA. You're going to get a picture in your mind of what that looks like because they've developed a clear position. Now, the second thing that I ask, and I did this at Google, we had about 250 people in Google. I helped one of the Google partners grow immensely quickly. As a result, Google tended to give us a room for free to run events at. And there's lots of lovely pictures of me on this huge, great big screen that's must be 30 to 40 feet wide, this screen. So presenting on that's good fun.
Okay,
and but we being at Google, sort of marketing style, most of the people in the room were agencies or marketing people, etc. So I said, so you're all marketing specialists. Can you please tell me why there's a Big Four? Big Four anything. Big Four accounting firms, Big Four supermarkets, Big Four car hire companies. I come off the airport, down the steps at Madrid airport, and there's 4 car hire companies. And it's the same for everyone. Why is there a Big Four? Now, the interesting thing here was there was a couple of marketing people in the room from a Big Four, and none of them knew the answer. So I said, so how can you manage what you're trying to communicate to your client if you don't know why markets segment into 4? And so what you end up with is 4 positions. And when people ask me, well, why is there a Big Four? There's a Big Four because there are only 4 positions to own. And they are basically product, price, market, service. So if I take those 4 car hire companies, Hertz is the product company. They're the ones with all the product. Avis is the service. We try harder. It's written on the badge. Obvious one, Budget is the price. And Sixt is the market specialist because they do A3s, A4s, and BMW 3 Series for the thrusting young executive. Yeah. And you'll find the same with credit cards. You'll find the same with all businesses as they start to emerge. Now, the mid-tier market isn't as sophisticated as that. So small business owners try and be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And what that's called is a generalist. And the only way you can select a generalist is on price. So if you are generally having lots of price conversations, it means it's because you haven't managed your position in the client's mind clearly, and they don't really know why they're buying you. So they think you're the same as everybody else. Therefore, the only way they can choose you is price. So the first thing I do with most mid-tier businesses is I work out what is their clear primary position. You have to have something that sits underneath all of those. You know, you have to have a product that you sell to a market at a price with a service level. But the point is, what's your primary? So if your primary is product, let me give you an example of how you can, certain things that you'll never ever get a cheap version. So I always say, you know, you're never ever going to buy the cheapest parachute. Like, you know, nobody is ever going to rock up at their mates, throw 7 parachutes on the floor and say, we're going skydiving, guys. I've got these from the cheapest guy I could find. Cheap on eBay, you'll be fine. So safety belts, parachutes, pensions advice, you're just not going to go to the cheapest. So there are some business models that don't have a price offering. But if you go to Rolls-Royce, you go for the product. You don't go for the service. You don't go to buy a car. And because you're buying a car, I think I'll go to Rolls-Royce because they're really nice. You go for the product. You go for the badge. You go for the product. But you expect the price to be commensurate with that product. So it must match it. You expect the service to be commensurate with that product. And you expect the person that walks into the showroom to be commensurate with that product. So you know what they're going to be like. So you know if the guy that walked in to buy a car is lost. Sorry, so you're in the wrong showroom. You need to go down the road to Ford. You know what I mean? It's obvious. 100%. If you rocked up to first class on Virgin and it was full of backpackers and kids, you'd be furious. Yeah. So all 4 have to match. What we find in the mid-tier market is I talk to a business owner and they say, oh, we've got a fantastic product. Price, well, we kind of get what we can. It's up, it's down, it's neutral. Service, oh, we're fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I said, what about your market? Oh, well, we kind of sell it to anybody. I go, that's called a license to go broke.
Yeah.
You can't sell a fantastic product with a fantastic service with mixed pricing to a mixed market.
Do you find when you go into organizations to help them solve these or find their primary position that they resist because they don't want to let go of the risk? Or
no, in actual fact, what you find is that most businesses have built a sweet spot, but they didn't know they did. Okay. So, most. I got to say most is more than half as opposed to 95%. Most have got a sweet spot. When we do a positioning exercise with a group, they very often try and jump to the end. They try and jump to what phrase could I use to sound cool with my clients? And it's the backwards engineering. So there's a simple rule with this. Excuse me. You have to build it, then badge it. You cannot badge it and then backwards engineer it. So brand people that come in and say, let me build your brand and here's your brand values. Could you all please now behave like that? Never works. No. The bank likes to say yes. Yeah, right. So you just can't come up with these slogans and then try and backwards engineer it. What you have to do is go in and find the DNA of what made those people special when they first started the business. What was the passion that started them? Because their core clients will have bought into that. And as we unfold positioning strategies with business, what the management team and the owner should say is, yeah, that's us. Oh, yeah, that's definitely us. The key here is not what you are. It's also being really, really diligent around what you're not. And when they go back and remember 3 years ago, 4 years ago when they started, when they were desperate, they're sitting there Friday afternoon with no orders and no money and they'll take anything. It's hard to let go of that. So 2 years later, to look at a client and say, you're the wrong client for us is hard. So mid-tier businesses tend to be generalists by entrepreneurial nature. They'll have a crack at anything.
And how do you find that DNA? I guess you take them through a process of diagnosis, do you?
It's quite a long process. We talk to them. We look at their collateral. We look at their website. We look at their documentation. We look at what they write and say to clients. We go and interview the clients and we ask them a series of in-depth questions. You can't do it with a questionnaire. You have to go and sit and interview the client and have a conversation with them because they'll let slip in subliminal language what they actually bought that client for, why they keep buying. And then when you match that up and say, right, we're going to stop saying anything that isn't that. What do your best clients who love you pay the most money for like? What did they buy? What did they come for? Now let's go and say more of that and we'll get more of them. And typically we can get between a 30 and 40% uplift in client and revenue by just getting the positioning, language and delivery right. Then you have to go and train all the salespeople to understand it. You have to train all the internal people to make sure they continually deliver it. And then you have to train their nerve to let go of the ones that are wrong.
Wonderful. And the way you describe it, obviously, is incredibly complex in terms of the way that you work it out. But it's so obvious when you think about it. You can't be a jack of all trades.
It's so simple.
Yeah. It is so simple. You're right. It's just getting people there and allowing people the space to let them get rid of the other three to some extent. But you mentioned primary, so there's one that's obviously the driver, but the other three need to fall in behind somewhere, don't they?
Well, let me give you a quick example. Qantas is a really good one to look at here. So Qantas's primary position is product. So you have to go, which column does their primary position sit in? And then what word do they use to explain that position? And the Qantas word is safe.
So when you talk about Qantas and product, you're talking about the plane and
their product is flying somewhere in a plane.
Yeah.
We're getting you from point A to point B in a plane. So the product is plane journeys. That's what you buy from us. And the primary reason you come to Qantas is for the product, which is because the whole process of selling you a plane journey, our word is safe. Now, what you then do is you build a delivery system behind that word safe. So they don't fly over unsafe air space. They don't fly to unsafe countries. At any point they would have to do that, they hand you off to another airline. So that's their primary position. Now their secondary positions now have to support their primary. So the language around the three secondary positions is as follows. Pricing, this is the only company that could really use this, although a beer company did steal it, and their language was reassuringly expensive.
Yeah.
So when you look at the price you pay for a Qantas ticket versus the price you pay for, let's say, an EasyJet ticket, you're going to notice the difference. Then the service level they had was clean. Now, why clean? Because in their mind, if you walk onto a Qantas plane, and it is immaculate. I mean, they have an extra 5-minute turnaround so that they can make sure the plane's immaculate. One of the Qantas people told me once, we don't clean the seat if it's been puked on or thrown up on. We change the seat.
Really?
So you're supposed to walk on there and go, wow, this plane's immaculate. I bet the brakes and the engines and the wheels have got the same. And the market they sell to is basically business and Q-only holiday. So top end. So the primary match the secondary position statements and language matches the primary. And then there's a whole bunch of secondary nice to have stuff. So in their world, nice to have would be polite. In other words, if you stand up on a Qantas plane before it's come to a standstill and somebody shouts at you and you complain, Qantas don't care. If you phone, seriously, like what happened? You stood up before the plane landed. The stewardess told you to sit the damn hell down or else. Whereas on Thai Airline, they'd go, oh dear, oh, somebody stood up. Oh, we don't know what to do about that. On Qantas, they're out of their chair, sit down now. None of this.
They lynch you.
They're down your throat. You write in and say the plane was dirty, all hell breaks loose.
Right.
So they defend their primary and secondary position.
So if I bring the sort of the big form positioning back into the world of sales, of those four, there's one that jumps out, which scares the living daylights out of most salespeople, which is price.
Yep.
But what I'm getting from this, obviously, is the more that you position price as a secondary or a tertiary, the less it becomes more of an issue to talk about because it's not the primary.
Well, look, it depends. If price is your primary, then it's easy to say. I remember my sales guys, when I used to work with my business. So this is an interesting positioning piece that I took up. I used to run a business called Combined Packaging Suppliers. What does that mean we do? We supply packaging. How interesting is that? Not particularly. How hard do we struggle with price? A lot. My guys could come back and get an order. If you can do this for 16p, you can have it. Because as far as the client's concerned, I just did packaging supplies.
It's commodity, yeah?
Exactly. So I changed that to Combined Packaging Solutions. It was nice because it was the same CPS logo. So Combined Packaging Solutions. And the rule then was the salespeople could only sell to the client if we were 10% more expensive. Now, I didn't tell them what that meant. What they had to do was go and work it out for themselves. It meant you had to go and find a problem that you had to solve that wasn't price. In other words, we never, ever, ever sold to a price client again.
And that is the difference between people that sell and people who just take orders, yeah?
So I said to them one day when they said, you can get an order if you can do this for 16p. I said, well, what I can also do is fire all of you and put a sign on the roof that says we're the cheapest.
Yeah.
Now, I had people leave me to buy stuff cheaper and come back and go, they can't do what you do. I go, I know, because I buy the best material. I have the best machines. My guys take longer to produce it than anybody else because they check every box. So your automatic machine that handles my packaging never breaks down because we've got no duds in there, and you have to pay for that. Yeah. Now you know buying cheap costs you 2.5 hours a day downtime on your machines because the boxes don't go through. I'm cheap, really.
Yep.
If I save you money, I'm cheap. And once I got that in my head that I never wanted to be in the price space. Now people say to me today when I tell them what we charge for our consulting, God, you're expensive. I go, compared to what?
Exactly.
Compared to a cabbage, probably.
Because it's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah. If I cost you 50 and make you 500, trust me, I'm cheap.
Absolutely. Yes. Everybody wants that deal, yeah?
Exactly.
And it is interesting because, having gone through 4 weeks with you now, Nick, and you've reinforced that message right the way through the whole program that we've been on. It's kind of really impossible now to do anything other than to solve somebody's problem, justify the investment they make, give them more back than they give you in the first place. Otherwise, walk away and do something else for a living.
Yep.
It's the fundamental principles of selling, isn't it?
Yep. The fundamental principles of selling are to allow somebody to buy a service that they need and want without forcing them.
Yeah.
The course I'm running with you, as I said to you at the beginning, this is called the art of selling without selling. This is creating space and understanding the decision-making process at a scientific and cultural level, an emotional level, is understanding that process so well that you create space for the client to go through that buying process with you.
The sort of the cognitive side of selling, the emotional side of selling. Let's just talk for a minute about the salesman's silence, because that's been something that's always intrigued me. I mean, I've been in sales for over 20 odd years. I would say only the last 6 really started to study it correctly.
Yeah.
But the salesman's silence was there through the whole of those 20 odd years, but never really understood it. But I understand it now.
But there's your point. Most people didn't understand it.
And most people I meet and I train don't understand it.
No.
I understand it now, but for the benefit of the listeners, let's just have a quick chat about the salesman's silence, because to some people, the silence is probably one of the most difficult skills to master. yet it's the only one where you literally do bugger all.
So we need to throw a little bit of depth on this one. So
we do. You're right.
Here's a simple phrase, and I said to you earlier on in the program. Occasionally, I say things that are profound, and I always give people a warning so they don't miss it. This is profound, so you didn't miss it. People buy in feeling and justify with thinking to reach knowing where they are calmly confident they've made the right decision. And once you understand that, people process in all three spaces. They process in a feeling space, they process in a thinking space, and they process in a gut instinct, I know space. So high process people who prefer thinking do pros and cons lists. They love their lists and they'll do pros and cons. High process feel energy people, everybody uses all three all the time, but you have a preference. So people who are really good at energy, reading energy, tuning into energy, understanding when two people are having a fight or having fun from across the road, those people, they talk to people, they tell stories and they talk what ifs and they create visions and pictures and they tune into the energy of the other person. And if the other person disapproves, they start to reduce, they tell stories about what will happen if we do, what will happen if we don't. High level no people just know. Now, that's the primary thing that they use to process. So the sales process that we train and that I've used for the last 20 years and have refined and refined and refined allows people to go through all three spaces in both a positive and a negative space.
Yep.
So that's what's the positive upside gut feel, what's the positive upside thinking, what's the possible downside thinking, what's the possible downside feeling. And they have to go through all of those processes through a understanding and realization of what that means. That's a lot to allow a client to do in one session.
Yep.
And to do that, you have to give the client plenty of space. So at the point at which you have established there is a requirement or a problem to solve, typically that problem is held in a feeling space. I'm concerned about sales. I'm concerned about my staff. I'm worried about making budget. It's held in a feeling.
All emotions, yes.
It's all emotions. And typically those emotions are quite negative and quite down energy. Most salesmen want to rescue that and try and bring it up and keep people excited. They won't allow the client to sit there. So if you present your solution to a feeling space, which is what you should be doing, then you should do that slowly because people aren't in their heads thinking, so they can't process. Ever tried to talk to somebody who's emotionally upset? They can't hear a word you say.
That word process is really important, isn't it?
Yep.
Allowing people to literally get the cogs working and
bingo. And that's the point there, is to get the cogs working. So what will happen is if you present in a feeling space, all of your presentation should be to them whilst they're in a feeling space. Now, what you want to do then is stop. Now, it's really key this. If the pause is a tactic and you're playing the game, you just lost. How do you know? The buyer folds their hands and looks at you and says, ha, 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 I know this game. And you've already stuffed it. So at that point, if it is truly a philosophy for you, then you need to demonstrate it's not the game and you need to say something without saying anything. So what I normally say at that point is, so I hope that was helpful. In other words, I don't say, so what do you think? So what do you want to do next? Or I just go, so I hope that was helpful. The buyer then goes, oh, it's not the game. We're not playing that he who speaks first loses game. And if you use it as a tactic, you'll get nailed every time. So why do you shut up? You shut up to allow those feelings to ruminate and to percolate and for them to consider what you've said and apply it to their feeling and in their mind and start looking at pictures of themselves with your product, without your product. What am I going to look like in this car, this house, this kitchen, etc. And when they are ready, they'll start processing and thinking. And if you interrupt any of this, they will go straight to thinking and they'll say, oh, well, look, thanks very much. I want to think about it. And they will only speak once they finish processing. Now, to give you an idea, the longest I've waited sitting in a boardroom watching a CEO process was 22 minutes. Never mind your 12 seconds, 22 minutes.
Holy cow.
And people can't see this. I do give an example normally of what they're doing. But literally, they're looking at the ceiling, they're looking at the desk, they're looking up at me, they're shaking their head, they're tutting, they're shaking their head, they're looking at me, they're looking at the desk, they're looking back at me, and I'm sitting dead straight, not fidgeting, not looking at anything, 22 minutes before the guy finally said what I knew he was going to say was, okay, what do we do now? Now, 6 months later, I'm training his sales team and I start talking about this, and he bounces off his chair. He goes, "You did that to me." And because everybody laughed, and I turned around and I said, "Yes. I did indeed. And I just want to check, did I do it to you?" "No, okay. I said, "Oh, did I allow you to process?" He said, "No, you allowed me." "How long did I pause then?" So I said, "Well, how long do you think?" And he went, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Now, fortunately, both he and I have got quite loud voices, and we're in a glass screened room, and all of the staff could hear it, and they all laughed. And he said, "What?" He said, and they literally said, no, you don't. We were all out in the office going, "What's going on? Nobody's speaking." It was over 20 minutes, and he wouldn't believe it. I said, "It's 22 minutes. I was watching the clock behind me, 22 minutes processing." He said it felt like 2. What salesmen have to get in their mind is when people are in a feeling space, you think about those times you were having fun. What did you say? Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? Yeah. No, time flies when you're in a feeling space, because time is a thinking process. There's no time in feeling. In the moment, you're making love with your other half. Trust me, you're not going that 60 seconds. That 60 seconds. That's 3.5 minutes. Like, you have no idea what time is going on when you're in a feeling space. So you need to give people permission to process until they speak. You have to trust they don't know how long it's taking. And when they're ready, they'll speak. What they'll say post that are things like, "Wow, what an amazing interview. You know, how did you create that space? How did you give us that? You know, I really felt heard. I really felt listened to." If it's a tactic, they'll feel manipulated and sold to.
A couple of things. Biggest win, biggest sale. I can't remember if it. I think you mentioned whether it was either you or someone that you knew, Nick, who won $1.5 million with the business over lunch for 2 questions. Is that right? Have I got that wrong?
Yeah, that's the biggest. I basically sold a £1.6 million coaching program by asking 2 questions. Actually, asking one question and then making one statement. And the one question was, "So tell me a bit about what you're looking to do with the business." Then I started eating. He talked for 42 minutes, told me what he wanted to do. I'd finished and he started. I said, "Yeah, I think we can show you how to do all of that." That was my pitch. I can show you how to fix all of that. And pause. And he literally paused. He looked at me. He looked at his plate. He said, "So what are we going to do now?" I very nearly jumped in and said, what would you like to do now?" He said, "So what are we going to do now?" He said, "Because I'd like to start Monday." That was it. "Tell me all about what you're looking to do with your business. I can show you how to fix all of that."
I'm laughing so much because everything that I'm hearing is reminding me of the work we've done together. And, you know, when you get a buyer to say, "So what do we do next?" It's kind of an important moment to some extent, isn't it? And that is a great way to sort of wrap things up and really say to anybody who's listening, if you get the chance to spend some time with Nic Rixon, my God, you need to go and do it, because it is, I wouldn't say it's completely life-changing, but it's not far off it. Nick, where can I send people to go and find you?
Look, I'm actually pretty easy to find. Nic, as in Nic, no K, Rixon. Email's dead simple. It's nick.rixon@SGFE, just the letters, sgfe.co.uk. But my phone number's on my LinkedIn profile, so you can find me on there. Thank you so much.
Last question I'm going to ask you, same one I ask everybody, and I think I might know the answer to this, but you might not use it as the example. I'm going to take you right back to the start of your career. So you're building your packaging empire right the way through Sherlock's, right the way through to where you are today.
Yeah.
And you have to change one thing, Nick. You have to change one thing.
Okay.
Not do you want to? You have to. I want you to think, what would that one thing be that you would change, and why would you change it?
I was always quite confident, not necessarily always capable of back up the confidence. But I probably would have, probably would have spent more time training in the early days. I didn't really come to training until I was about 24, 25, to be fair. I left school at 15. So what would I change? I probably would have done a bit more training. I may not have started a manufacturing business. Now that's 23 years of hindsight, because that was a lot to manage, the responsibility of machines and people's fingers, and accidents, and we never lost anybody or anybody hurt, but the stress of running that business was probably more than I would have liked. So I would probably have started an intellectual property business earlier if I'd known. I think that's it. I probably wouldn't have gone into manufacturing. I enjoyed it. I loved it. I was good at it, but it was stressful. And all the other businesses I did around it, I enjoyed a lot more. And I came to dread going into the factory, and which is why I built all the other businesses around it, because although it kept things moving, it kept paying for stuff, it wasn't where my passion was. My passion was helping people solve problems. And I found I kind of did more of that with my clients that I supplied packaging for. I found I was consulting more about their marketing strategies and how to get their salespeople to work properly, which is why the training business started up. So I probably wouldn't have started manufacturing if I had to go back and do it all over again. And I probably wouldn't have allowed my wife to continue to be my PA after I married her.
Okay.
That was, because
she's no longer your PA though.
She was my PA for 27 years, best PA I ever met in my entire life. She was fabulous, but it meant we never stopped talking about work.
Yeah.
So I probably wouldn't have mixed that. Those are the two things I probably would have done differently.
Fantastic, Nic. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope the listeners have got as much value from it as I certainly have, and I've been through this a couple of times now.
My absolute delight.
Yeah, so grateful for your time, and thanks very much for coming to the podcast.
You're more than welcome.